Hey pen people, I have a quick ink review for you today. This is Noodler's Air-Corp Blue Black. So I feel like this one flies, no pun intended, this one flies under the radar a little bit. It's not an ink that I've really heard people talk about, but I got this bottle from my dad. It was a bottle of ink that he had that he was struggling with, and I'll explain that later. But I actually really enjoy this ink. So he gave it to me and I haven't had any issues. It's a cool ink and I wanted to share it with you. So this is one of Noodler's commemorative inks. Nathan Tardif, the creator, really likes history. He comes up with all of these cool historical events or people or different things to name his inks after. And so this was really interesting. I looked it up and I was like, wow, that's a piece of history I had no idea about. So it's interesting. It's worth looking up. So it's a blue-black ink, and we'll get more into the color later. It's got the signature catfish kind of disguised as a fighter pilot there. The catfish, of course, goes along with the Noodlers brand because noodling is hunting for catfish with your hands. So that's a look at the bottle. If you're familiar with Noodler's ink, there's no surprises there. It's a 3-ounce bottle. Pretty big bottle. You won't run out anytime soon. And the price, even though I'm pretty sure they upped the price recently, it's still a pretty competitive price for what you're getting. So let's take a look at the ink itself. I did a writing sample before I started filming. I figured that would save you time watching and it would save me time editing later. So I have a writing sample here and I'm going to move my pen. This is the pen I used. This is the Mythic Pen Company Extra Large Aeschylus, and it's a really cool handmade, hand-turned resin pen. It's enormous. And so I'm excited to show this to you in more detail in a future video, so stay tuned for that. But let's take a look at this ink. And to do that, I have kind of a different writing sample for you today. Oh my goodness, it's gonna be hard to get in the frame. That's okay, we'll work with it. All right, so this is the opening to something I actually wrote, and it was recently published, and I'll tell you where you can go find it in a second here. So this is a little story about me, sort of. Anyway, I'll explain. 150 tourists, many of us teenagers, many of us feeling the urge to pair off for our 30 days in Europe. She was on my bus. We hung out. I liked her because she was a runner, tall and pretty, her dye blonde hair swept back in a ponytail that was always dancing. Which is why, as we waited in the tube, towing the Mind the Gap line, I wanted to push her, give her shoulders a little shove, just enough to get a squeal. That's how I was taught to flirt with girls. Okay, so this is a little memoir essay thing. We call it flash memoir or a flash essay. It's called Touring the Multiverse. And so basically what I do in this piece is I take one event from my life and look at it from the perspective of potential parallel universes. So I tell the same story 3 different times, 3 different ways, with 3 different outcomes to kind of show the consequences of our actions and the consequences of our culture and the kinds of things that we're taught. There's a lot that I like about my culture and a lot that I like about where I come from and the life that I've lived. But as I've thought about things, I realized there was a lot of weird stuff going on, like gender-wise. And I really kind of picked up on this idea from my peers and maybe from media that the way to flirt with girls was to be kind of rough with them, to scare them, to make them scream, to, whatever. Sounds really awful now that I'm saying it out loud, but that's just kind of what I saw, Teenage boys were always poking and pranking and whatever else on the girls just to, I don't know, try to get a reaction. And I've realized that's messed up. So this essay is me kind of exploring that and its influence on my life. So you can find this essay if you want to continue reading it and figure out what happened, or at least 3 things that might have happened. You can just Google my name, Brian Wallace Baker, and Touring the Multiverse, and it should come up. It's in a little publication online called Oxmag. It's a little university literary journal that's online. Anyway, let's talk about the color of this ink. It's always so hard to feel like I'm getting the ink color accurately, but I have some new lights and I have a nice open sunny window, so hopefully that's going to help us here. So this is a blue-black ink, and I feel like it's a pretty true blue-black. It's pretty dark, leans more black rather than blue. If you hadn't told me this was a blue-black, I would probably just think it was a black ink. I'm not the most sensitive to color, but it's pretty dark. There is just a little bit of, I guess, shading. It's not really, I mean, black, blue, black, you're not really after lots of shading with those inks, but you can see a little bit of color variation where sometimes it will get just a little bit brighter or a little fainter, I guess, and it will kind of go gray, maybe kind of a blue-gray, but it is pretty dark. It's a pretty dark ink. Okay, and to give you some comparisons, I don't have a huge ink collection, but I fortunately had a few inks that I felt like were, or a couple inks that I felt like were good comparisons to this one, these good ones to talk about, and they're all Noodlers. So first one obviously is Noodler's Air-Corp Blue Black, and it does have some good blue in there. Once you compare it with an actual like black ink, you can kind of see the blue. And then here we have Noodler's Black. This one has a warmer tone. This is a cooler tone. This is warmer. This one almost has a yellowy tint to it, which I don't mind too much, but I much prefer the cooler tone, the kind of the bluer side of things. And then down here we have Noodler's 54th Massachusetts. So I believe that's also considered to be a blue-black ink, although it's much lighter, and to me it's more of like a dark blue-green or something. But yeah, so you can see how it's kind of, this one's kind of in between these two. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what this ink looks like. And like I said, I wrote this with my Mythic Pen Company extra large Aeschylus, and it's a fine number. Whoa, I forgot the 6. Oh man, I do that sometimes, just like completely forget to write something when I'm in the middle of things. Hopefully I'm not missing any other of those. That would be embarrassing. Anyway, so it is a number 6 Yovo nib. So this ink actually is fairly wet, and I think that's where my dad ran into problems. He was using his Noodler's Ahab, which is a very inky, wet pen, and he was writing, I think, on Clairefontaine paper, so a fairly ink-resistant paper that doesn't absorb a lot of ink. And so he was writing, and then he just kind of had to let his notebook sit there and dry for like hours. I haven't had that issue, and I think it's because I tend to use finer pens, not super duper fine. I mean, this is definitely like a Western fine, but it is wet enough, you know, and I haven't had any problems. So as long as you don't have a pen that's completely out of control, I think you'll be fine. And if you have something that's more like a broad or something like that, just, I don't know, get some blot paper or something, and I think you'll probably be fine. The flow, even though it is wet, it's not out of control. I think it's a nicely balanced ink that way. It's not like 54th Massachusetts, which is just this gushy, runny thing that I love it, but I hate it because of that. It just feels out of control. I feel like the way it writes is pretty comparable to Noodler's Black as far as the flow is concerned. Okay, now water resistance. This is a very water resistant ink, and I really like it for that. Of these 3 here, it's probably the least water resistant, 54th Massachusetts being the most, Bulletproof Black or Noodler's Black being the second, and then this one being the third, but it's still pretty darn water resistant. So here's my page where I've been testing my inks lately. And so we've got Noodler's Air-Corp Blue Black right here, and my water resistance test. You can see how the blue components of the ink are lifting up off the page, but the black is not going anywhere. So it's still a very crisp line. So if you get it wet, your writing will be perfectly legible. You just might turn your page blue a little bit. So maybe that's not a bad thing. Might be kind of pretty. So very water resistant, not waterproof, but very water resistant. And I would trust this ink to hold up to a lot of water damage. We've kind of already talked about this, but dry time might be a little bit on the slow side, but I haven't had any issues. My dad had issues because of his gushy pen, but I haven't had any issues. I also haven't had any issues with cleaning. I haven't used this ink a ton. I've used it on a few different pens and I haven't had any issues, so I don't expect to have any issues moving forward with this ink. And then as far as bleed and feather goes, it's a pretty crisp line. No feathering. This is Rhodia dot pad. No feathering there. And bleed through, it's pretty dark ink, so on cheaper paper you might get some bleed through, but nothing on this nicer paper. So no real concerns there. The last thing I want to mention, and I don't know what to make of this, but something about this ink is a little different as far as its formula goes. So this cloth here is what I use to wipe nibs when I'm cleaning. I've noticed something kind of interesting. So this is where I kind of blotted my nib, this nib here, as I was refilling it before filming this video. And what I've noticed that is kind of odd is, like, if I were to rub my finger on this, I think this was like Conpecky or something. Nothing comes off on my finger. That's just ink that's already been there. Here, let's use a clean finger. So nothing's coming off on my finger, but if I do the same thing with this one, I can feel something. It almost feels kind of greasy. And then you can see it's like rubbing off on my finger. So that hasn't happened in my notebooks. It's not like sticking to the opposite page in my notebooks, but something about this ink is a little bit funny. It just has kind of this greasy feel afterward. No, that's not really the right word. It just, I don't know what to make of it. If any of you understand the chemistry of ink and can explain that to me, that would be great. But I haven't noticed any problems coming from that. It's just kind of an odd quirk of this ink. But I think that's it. This is a good ink. I've enjoyed using it. I'm going to continue to use it as one of my main go-to black inks because it's pretty dark, you know? So yeah, let me know what you think and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.